Thank you all for being here with us on a Friday afternoon. We've got a really fun and entertaining program here, Thinking on Your Feet, Staying in the Moment with Patrons and Coworkers. We have Jay Edwards here from the University of Oklahoma Libraries. Jay Edwards is a circulation supervisor for OU Libraries and an MLIS student at the University of Oklahoma. He has been improvising since 2001, co-founded Red Dirt Improv and Improv Festival Oklahoma, and began as the improv director of the Norman Medieval Fair in 2015. Jay is currently studying peer-to-peer learning and reference and is working improvisation into training for user services. So without further ado, I will give it over to Jay.
All right, thank you very much, Kristen, and big thanks to the rest of the Amigos and OLA teams for their flexibility and adaptability in moving the entire OLA conference online. As Kristen said, my name is Jay, and as many have already said, I regret that we can't meet personally, primarily because I was going to show off my 20s clothes that I was going to wear for the Murder Mystery Scholarship Bash that was going to happen Thursday night during the conference. And then my original presentation was going to be Friday morning, the next morning at 8 a.m. And I was going to use that opportunity to wake everyone up by getting them on their feet and being active with some of the face-to-face exercises that I'm going to talk about today. These exercises are focused on flexibility and adaptability, specifically when working with other people, everyone from patrons to coworkers and any other types of people that you might interact with. And developing some interpersonal and collaborative skills, those soft skills that are very hard to just learn on paper, that are much easier to learn by doing. And I think these skills will be even more important in the near future. After we've been social distancing for so long, I feel that I'm out of practice sometimes, but I'm going to talk about a tool that I really like to use to help interact with other people. So today, we won't be able to do these face-to-face exercises online. There are bandwidth concerns, and sometimes it's just a little awkward being alone and interacting with people online. So I'll have a few video demonstrations of a couple of exercises I recorded with some of my student employees, but I still want things to be a little interactive. Go ahead and use the chat to write out any questions, any observations that you have during this presentation. If you click on your name in the chat, that will open up a set status bar, and you can use those statuses to react to what's going on. I will be asking a few questions and doing a few polls. You do not have to interact if you don't want to. Observation is absolutely a valid form of learning. You can respond to a few questions and not to others, whatever you feel comfortable with. Special thanks, by the way, to Courtney Oliphant. She's been very supportive of developing these workshops and activities and is responsible for the title in its current form. Back when we got to be in the library last year, she walked up to me and just said, "Thinking on Your Feet, Staying in the Moment with Patrons and Coworkers." And I said, "That's a great title. Can I use it?" She said, "Yeah," and I did. All right, next slide, please. Before we begin our activities, I would like to mention that even as we meet virtually today, I want to respectfully acknowledge and honor the indigenous communities whose traditional, ancestral, and sovereign lands we live and work on today. I want to express my gratitude specifically to the Comanche, Kickapoo, Osage, and Wichita, who are the native to the region where I currently stand, and to all the past, present, and future stewards of the land we now call Oklahoma. Next slide, please, Kristen. So first thing I want you to do is introduce yourselves in the chat. You may want to tell us what kind of library you're at, what part of the state you live in, what area of the library you're in, perhaps circulation or admin or tech services, perhaps any exciting library projects you're working on right now. I'll go first. My name is Jay Edwards. As Kristen said, I'm the circulation supervisor for the university, for the Fine Arts Library at the University of Oklahoma Libraries. I've been here for about 12 years. I'm currently a student. I have about 2 classes before I finish up my master's in library and information studies. And I've been doing improvisation for a little over 20 years now. Kristen, do you want to mention a few people who are introducing themselves?
Yep. So we've got Jolene, who's the director of the Ada Public Library. I'm sorry, I'm not Oklahoman, so if I mispronounce that, I apologize, Jolene. We've got Madison. She's a metadata librarian from Oklahoma State University's Edmond Low Library in Stillwater. We've got Caitlin, who works at the Central Library for Tulsa City County. I guess she used to work with you, Jay, when she was a student at OU. Got Jason, who's a circulation supervisor at Martin Regional Library, Tulsa City County Library System. Blair, who's director of the Guman Public Library and Art Center. They're coming so fast now. I apologize. I'll skip you there. We've got Jana, who's the electronic resources and systems librarian at Cameron University. Robin Miller, she's a children's librarian at Northwest Library, a branch of the Metropolitan Library System.
And there are 86 people here, and this is an amazing crowd. So I apologize that we won't be able to introduce everybody here, but we are going to be able to record the chat, aren't we? I should have asked this before the presentation.
Yes, we keep the chat as well.
Excellent. So let's go on to the next slide. And right now we're going to have a poll. Which of these skills, of these 5 skills, is the top skill that you use for your job? And this list is a hybrid of skills that I pulled from not only OU Libraries Values, but also a Library Journal article, The Top Skills for Tomorrow's Librarians by Meredith Schwartz. And so I kind of cobbled these together. The Library Journal article had about 11 skills, many of which relate directly to what we're talking about today. So you should see, excellent. Oh, there is a very clear winner, the one that we're mostly talking about today, communication and people skills. The other 4 will relate to some of the things that we're working on today. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. Kind of the same question, which one do you struggle with the most? And we'll give you just a few seconds to decide, especially if there are multiple ones that I personally struggle with. I am an introvert, and so I absolutely understand losing energy the more time that you communicate with other people. Engagement seems to be the big thing, followed a little bit more equally with everything. So we will discuss a tool that I really like to use that I find helps me with each of these 5 areas. So let's go ahead and go on to the next slide. Second question. Describe a time you experienced something unexpected or unpredicted in your library. And this is important, prior to the year 2020. This can be positive or negative. It can be anything like a patron's question, a new opportunity that comes up, an initiative that cropped up and you took advantage of. And I wanted to do this before the year 2020, obviously, because nobody really expected the pandemic. Nobody expected the Spanish Inquisition or the Spanish flu. I wanted to focus mostly on everyday events that you can plan for, but you don't know exactly what they're going to say. So, Kristen, anything come up yet?
So Jolene mentions a water line break on the second floor, first day of summer program. I can say that I had someone go into labor during an origami program.
Wow.
Once that was unexpected. Assisting a homeless man and helping him with resources, who returned with a job clean and sober. Yay.
That's great. Yeah.
Madison had to assume supervisory duties of student team on short notice without prior supervisory experience. I
can relate to that, yes.
Robin had a patron approach the service desk holding a beer in her hand.
Of course.
Blair had a pipe burst which flooded the entire library with 2 inches of water, and they had to close for a month and do services during that time. Julie once planned for 20 participants in an adult crafting class and got 108.
That's a good problem to have.
Calantha had a clear an incident of child abuse within the library.
I hope that ended up well.
Yeah.
As well for all parties involved.
Nicole had the roof peeled off the building during a storm.
Oh my.
Got soaked. Lot coming. Oh, toilet clogged with a cupcake. That one.
My.
What a waste of a cupcake. Jeez.
Yeah.
It's just sad.
So what I'm seeing a lot of is this range from big events to the smaller everyday events. And one thing that I want to point out is that we all improvise at some point during the day. No matter how much you plan, something will happen that you haven't planned for or haven't planned exactly for something like that. And it doesn't have to be, of course, something happens that something goes wrong and you have to figure out how to interact with that. But even in the things that we plan for, there are just those small moments that we still have to be present for. I'm going to read a quote from Michelle Reel from the book, Becoming a Reflective Librarian, that really says this very well. Even if we have prepared for a lesson plan and any other preparation that we go through in our daily professional lives, we are thinking on our feet, acting in the moment, because while we can be reasonably certain of what we think we will teach, say, and so on, what we cannot possibly predict is the reaction of those with whom we are interacting. So I'm seeing a lot of great stories here. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide, and I'm going to show you a tool that I use that really helps me stay in the moment and really helps through all the experiences that I've had. And this is a concept that comes from improv theater that's been around for about 50 or 60 years. This is a formula called yes and. Yes represents the acceptance of information you receive from someone else, while and represents your response that specifically builds on the information you received. And so using this formula, participants can generate, explore, and expand upon ideas in new and surprising ways. And I want to well, first I'll talk a little bit about Keith Sawyer. Keith Sawyer is an education and psychology professor from the University of South Carolina, North Carolina, I forget which Carolina, on Chapel Hill. And he calls this phenomenon that comes out of yes and collaborative emergence. It's collaborative because no single participant can control the outcome, and the outcome is collectively determined by all participants. And it's emergent because the outcome can't be predicted in advance, and it comes out of the interaction with each other. The experience with the homeless person that they helped, that was a yes and moment. The patron needed some information, and the response was not to reject them, and it was not to ignore them. It was to say and by giving them the information they need, by finding out the information they need and then giving it to them. And then that collaborative emergence resulted in them getting a job and helping them out with their life. Next slide, please. So there are a couple of examples that come from improvisational theater. The first one from the book Truth and Comedy by Del Close and Charna Halpern, where imagine that two people are on stage, and the first one says, "Let's go to the movies." The next one's response is yes to going to the movies, and let's sneak out of the house through the basement. And so what's happening here is that they are accepting the premise of going to the movies, but then they're adding more information about what kind of situation they're in, implying that they have to sneak out of the house, perhaps because they are portraying children and the parents are upstairs, and so they have to sneak out of the house. Now, yes and doesn't have to be literal. A second example from Alan Alda's book, If I Understood You, Would I Have This Look on My Face, imagines two people. The first says, "Look at all that water down there." And the second person doesn't say, "That's not water, that's a stage," and breaks the shared reality. They instead say, "Wow, what a lot of water. Let's jump in," accepting the premise that there's a lot of water and then jumping in. Next slide, please. So there are several skills that are related to yes and, both in that these skills help the process of yes and, but also practicing this with active activities helps build these skills. I'm not going to go through all of these, but I will point out, obviously, flexibility and adaptability. You have to be aware of what's going on around you so that you can build on and say yes and effectively. That means active listening. That means focusing on what's going on in front of you. And also you have to have respect for each other, have respect for their choices so that you can support them and they will trust you that you will support them. Next slide, please. So since we can't do this right now face-to-face, I'm going to demonstrate this concept by using pictures. Now, I need 2 volunteers from the audience. So if you would like to volunteer, go ahead and say so in the chat. And Kristen is going to open up a whiteboard. And what you will notice is that your cursor is right here on the front. So if 2 people would like to volunteer, just say so in the chat. Calantha, excellent. So Calantha, where is your cursor? Do we see you? There you are. And one more person. And so what we're going to do is, this is a drawing board that Kristen Tubb used yesterday. And Julie, excellent. So all I drew was a circle on the board. So Calantha, why don't you go ahead and draw a second shape in response to this circle? Excellent. Julie, your turn. Draw one more shape. Excellent. Calantha, your turn. Awesome. And Julie, you can draw 2 of those if you want, because I think I know what you're doing. Awesome. So as you can see, all we started with was a circle. And the next person who drew a shape on the board had an array of choices. They could have drawn another circle. They could have drawn lines going out. They could have drawn little petals around it. But Calantha chose a curve, which most of us, I think, interpreted as a mouth. And then Julie added some ears, and then we had some hair, and then we ended up with a whole face. And so this is yes and in action. One person added information, the other person accepted it, and then added information on their own. And then real quick, I'm going to get a screenshot of this so that I can save it for later. And Kristen, if you want to go ahead and advance to the next slide. So this leads me to a concept called applied improvisation. There is an entire industry of professionals who have developed workshops designed for for-profit and nonprofit institutions, mostly corporate institutions because that's where the money is, but they also do it for places like schools and libraries. The important part about these workshops is that they are group-based. They are low risk and low anxiety. So even though it's developed from improv theater, it's not about being on stage in front of people and giving you stage fright. It's about developing the skills you need for the stage. And in this case, it's developing the skills that you need for interpersonal interaction. Next slide, please. And this is the basis of what we are doing at the University of Oklahoma Libraries. We have started some workshops, some more simple workshops for our new library student assistant orientation, since most of them work the front desk and help other people. Many others work with other people in tech services and administration. And we've also developed some more in-depth workshops specifically for librarians. Next slide, please. And the first video that I'm going to show you is one of the more simple, the first exercises that we do for these workshops. For these exercises, we pair up participants and everybody goes all at once. We spread out into the room so that everybody can hear each other while I and assistants move around to supervise. I'm going to have Kristen show the video. I would like to point out that while we are on Zoom, we are in the same library, but we do have separate workstations with walls between us so that we can be socially distanced. And while we watch this video, go ahead and write in any observations and questions that you have in the chat. All right, Kristen.
afternoon.
All right, so if you click your name on the left and set status, there is a little applause reaction. Why don't you give them a round of applause for Janeri and Cecily? Awesome, thank you. So did anyone see how the last round was different from the previous three? Exactly, Madison. They built into the same image. Before, they were just kind of listing things that had no relation to each other. But once they actually started accepting the other thing, they started building into the one idea and going on a theme. So usually after we do this exercise, we do a little bit of a discussion and reflection on the stuff that just happened. And one of the questions I usually ask is how do you feel when you, during that dismissive round and the rejection round? And as some of you have already seen, they're a lot more engaged with the positive one, but usually they reply with feeling devalued. As a patron would feel if they were rejected at the desk. And when I ask the question, what's worse, dismissal versus rejection, most people say the dismissive attitude, partially because the rejection attitude can be a little cartoonish. Sometimes, like Tom said, their response would be, fruit punch, I'll punch you. And sometimes it'll get ridiculous, like, I'm allergic to Chardonnay, picnic baskets killed my father. But I think the dismissive attitude, it's kind of like when you go up to a restaurant and they don't make eye contact with you. They ignore the 10-foot rule that if you come within 10 feet, they acknowledge you. We talk a lot about library anxiety, this intimidation that people have that keeps them from coming up to the desk to find help for the things that they need. And it's a real thing. And the way that you interact with patrons and the way you interact with your coworkers makes a big difference. It's also hard when you're negative, when you're dismissive and rejective. It's hard to come up with the next idea. But when they started accepting each other, they started building, it started going faster and much more entertaining. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. And the next video that we're going to watch is a collaboration exercise called Word at a Time. I'm trying to get to my own notes, excuse me. There we go. So the video will explain a bit more about what's going on. It is going to be, it's going to feel a little slow because of the Zoom interaction, but bear with us and watch what happens. And then I'm going to mute and then be ready to give a round of applause at the end. Kristen? All right, go ahead and give them a round of applause. So imagine this game with many more than 3 people. I've done it with upwards of 30 people, and it works just as well. And, you know, in my years of doing this exercise in libraries, I have never had a sentence go off the rails. They always made sense somehow. Yes, Brittany, avocados do equal love. So everybody makes mistakes, and if you have seen, I absolutely blanked on what the second ingredient was. But one thing about Yes and is that it's okay to make mistakes. All you have to do is go off what's going on beforehand and add to it. And Chineri and Cecily, they called me out after we were recording, but they were very supportive of my mistake and what I contributed, nevertheless, to the story. So one thing that happens in this game is that you cannot predict where the story is going in advance, especially if you have a large crew with like 30 people. The story is going to be in a completely different spot by the time it gets around to you. So you have to accept what happened before you. You also have to listen intensely to what's going on. And usually when I do this exercise, everyone is hooked on every word. And I also point out that there are never any small parts in this game. Every word is important, including the smaller words like for and to and are just as important as the nouns and verbs. Just like, why not the library? Everybody from the director and the dean down to the volunteers, the student employees, all have to be engaged, and they're just as important for the function of the sentence. This is also a game that makes sure. One of the big concepts of improvisation and collaboration is this concept called decentering. Julia Torres spoke at ALA on equity, diversity, and inclusive issues. And one of the big things that helps is leaving your ego at the door, recognizing that it's not about you, it's about us. And if you make a mistake, kind of like I did, say yes and to it. Yes, admit the mistake, and then move on, and continue to support each other. And of course, this could one weakness of yes and is the reactive attitude. So reflection is just as important. If you have the time, go look up Michelle Reel's book on becoming an reflective librarian. Let's see, next slide, please. So I've been looking at different ways that we can apply these activities into library services. We just saw teamwork and collaboration with Word at a Time and user services with the Yes and game. There are some deeper concepts that we can get into within the library. For the reference interview, where a patron comes up and asks a question and we help them find the information they need, those are entirely improvisational. And many people, librarians, have found difficulty with replicating a reference interview in class or for new librarians. But we can break down the skills that we need, such as collaborating with each other, or specifically listening, active listening with each other, or building trust with each other. Same thing with instruction. Most teachers don't feel that they get a lot of experience until their student assistantships. Keith Sawyer, who I mentioned earlier, has been writing a lot about how improvisation works with instruction. And then I'm also looking at information literacy, about when you're looking up information in a catalog or database, you are essentially improvising with it. The database is yes-anding your information. You're giving the database information and it's saying yes to that and giving you information back. So the user or the patron using the database has to learn how to yes and the database back in order to effectively look for information. I also want to talk a little bit about no. Yes and is one tool that you can put in your tool belt. Most people, I find, are okay most of the time with no, because occasionally books are going to be checked out. You can't double book yourself. So if someone wants to meet, but you have another meeting, you're going to have to say no to that. A lot of us have heard the phrase, the customer is always right. And like many phrases, that's only part of the phrase. Marshall Field once said, right or wrong, the customer is always right. So we're acknowledging that the customer can be wrong, or your coworkers can be wrong, or we can be wrong. We can mistake avocados for love. But our job is to help make the other person be right. So you may need to literally say no. Of course, reality is going to catch up to you. But if you have the spirit of yes, you can find some way to help the other person. If the book is checked out, can you do a hold? Can you do interlibrary loan? Is there another book that has similar information? And so on. Obviously, you don't want to yes and inappropriate behavior. And if someone asks you to do something illegal, maybe don't yes and that activity. Next slide, please. A couple of resources that you can use once we don't have to socially distance. The Improv Network and Applied Improvisation Network are resources with professionals who can come teach workshops at your library for the public or for your staff. Also, Jill Markgraf runs the Library Improv blog. They haven't updated in a few years, but they still have some really good resources there. Next slide, please. Some local resources are theaters around Oklahoma, OKC Improv in Oklahoma City, Rabbit Hole in Tulsa. Currently, I think they're still closed, but they will be open once everybody else can open safely. But also check your local schools, colleges, and universities, because teachers and student groups may be recruited to help teach workshops. And certainly, I will be available as well once it's safe to come down to your library. All right, next slide, please. And I will always say board games. Board games provide excellent opportunities to practice situational awareness or flexibility within structure when you're playing within rules. And there are all sorts of different venues that you can play in, especially programming at libraries. If you do programming at libraries, I encourage you to participate with them. Next slide, please. So the last thing I want to do, and then I'll open it up for questions, go ahead and reach out to 3 people in the chat if you're comfortable. Click on a person's name, click chat for private chat. Try to find someone who works in the same area as you do, who's maybe working in the same part of the library, and then send them your contact info. And if someone sends you their contact info, I encourage you to say yes and respond back with your own contact info. Alternatively, post your social media in the chat. All right, next slide, please. And so now I'm going to open it up to questions, and I'm going to have Kristen open up whiteboard so we can all draw on the screen while I answer some questions. All right, Kristen, has any questions come in while we were talking?
Just a lot of comments about they liked the video and making them hungry about the picnic.
Uh-huh. Some cucumber and avocado lasagna.
Somebody wanted to put that on a shirt. Lots of love of board games. But yeah, if anyone has any questions, we've got just a couple minutes left, but please put them in the chat.
And yes, I look forward. Sorry, Kristen?
I said I'm liking the drawings.
Yes. Everybody can draw, and I'm seeing some great drawings right now. But yes, I'm looking forward to seeing you all again in person in the future so that we can even try some of these activities in person. And if we have time, doing some more games that really get into things like collaboration and helping people find information that they need.
All right. Well, I think there's just one more session left of the day. So I hope everybody goes and enjoys that and takes time to check out those pre-recorded sessions. Thank you so much, Jay, for doing the session. It was really exciting. And I hope everyone has a great weekend and a great rest of your conference.
Thank you very much.